They mocked the quiet kid until he showed them why that was their biggest mistake. 15-year-old Adrian Blackwood sat in the back corner of his chemistry class at Westfield High, hunched over his textbook with practiced invisibility. His slight frame and wire-rimmed glasses made him look fragile, almost breakable. Dark hair fell across his pale forehead as he scribbled notes, trying to ignore the paper balls that occasionally found their way to his desk. 3 weeks into his first semester at this new school, Adrian had already established himself as the perfect target. He'd moved to Westfield after his father's military transfer, leaving behind the dojo where he'd spent the last 8 years training in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts. His instructor, Master Santos, had been like a second father to him, teaching him discipline, control, and the sacred responsibility that came with lethal skills. "Violence is the last resort, Adrian," Santos had always said. "A true warrior seeks peace, but when forced to fight, he ends it quickly and decisively." The bell rang, and Adrian packed his books slowly, hoping to avoid the hallway rush. But as he stepped into the corridor, a shoulder slammed into him, sending his backpack tumbling and spilling papers across the polished floor. "Watch where you're going, freak!" sneered Jake Morrison, the school's starting quarterback and undisputed king of the social hierarchy. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and a cocky grin, Jake commanded respect through intimidation. His two constant companions, Tyler Brooks and Mason Reed, flanked him like loyal attack dogs, already snickering at Adrian's predicament. Adrian knelt to gather his scattered homework, his face burning with embarrassment as other students stepped around him. He could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see if he'd stand up for himself. Instead, he whispered a quiet "sorry" and hurried toward his next class. "Did you hear that?" Tyler laughed, his red hair catching the fluorescent lights. "He apologized to us." Mason, tall and lean with cruel dark eyes, kicked one of Adrian's pencils further down the hall. This pattern continued for weeks. In the cafeteria, Jake would accidentally bump Adrian's lunch tray, sending food cascading onto his clothes. During gym class, Tyler made sure Adrian was always picked last for teams, then targeted him mercilessly during dodgeball. Mason took particular pleasure in knocking books from Adrian's arms between classes, creating a trail of papers that Adrian would scramble to collect while students laughed and filmed with their phones. The worst incident happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Adrian was walking toward the bus loop when Jake appeared with his crew, blocking the exit. "Hey there, bookworm," Jake said with false friendliness. "We've been thinking about you." Adrian's heart rate spiked, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Tyler stepped closer, his breath reeking of energy drinks. "Who said anything about trouble? We just want to talk." Without warning, he shoved Adrian backward into a brick wall. "About how you think you're better than everyone else." "I don't think that," Adrian said quietly, his hands instinctively positioning themselves in a defensive stance he quickly disguised as adjusting his backpack straps. Years of training had taught him to read aggression, and every signal screamed danger. Mason circled around behind him. "Look at him, trying to act tough now." He grabbed Adrian's backpack and dumped its contents onto the wet pavement, grinding a textbook under his heel. "Oops!" Adrian's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Son, with great power comes great responsibility. You have skills that could seriously hurt someone. Promise me you'll only use them when you have absolutely no other choice." "Pick it up," Jake commanded, gesturing to the scattered books and papers now soaking in puddles. "And next time, show some respect." Adrian knelt in the rain, collecting his ruined homework while the three bullies laughed above him. Students walking to buses stared but said nothing, their silence as crushing as the laughter. When Adrian finally stood, waterlogged books clutched to his chest, Jake leaned in close. "You're pathetic," he whispered. No wonder your daddy had to drag you away from your old school. Bet you didn't have any friends there either. That night, Adrian called Master Santos from his bedroom, his voice thick with frustration. "I feel like a coward," he confessed. "I could have stopped it, but I just stood there." "You showed true strength," Santos replied firmly. "Any fool can throw punches. It takes a warrior to choose restraint. But Adrian, remember what I taught you about the line. When someone threatens your safety or dignity in a way that cannot be resolved peacefully, you have not just the right, but the duty to defend yourself. Trust your judgment." The breaking point came 3 weeks later during lunch period. Adrian sat alone at his usual table in the far corner of the cafeteria, trying to finish a sandwich while reading for his next class. The cafeteria buzzed with typical teenage chaos. Conversations, laughter, the clatter of trays and silverware. Jake approached with his crew, but this time something was different. His eyes held a cold malice that made Adrian's blood run cold. The quarterback had been having a bad week. His girlfriend had dumped him. He'd been benched for missing practice. And his father was threatening to take away his car if his grades didn't improve. He needed someone to blame, someone to hurt. "Well, well," Jake announced loudly, making sure nearby tables could hear. "Look who thinks he's too good to sit with normal people." He grabbed Adrian's book and held it high, examining the cover with exaggerated interest. "What's this? Advanced physics? Trying to show off how smart you are?" Adrian stood slowly, his training kicking in as he assessed threats and escape routes. "Please give that back. I need it for class." "Oh, you need it?" Jake's voice dripped with mock concern. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to be such a stuck-up little weirdo." He tossed the book to Tyler, who caught it with a grin. "Definitely looks boring," Tyler announced, flipping through pages. "Think it would be more interesting if it had some ketchup on it?" He squeezed a packet over the open book, the red sauce spattering across the pages. Adrian felt something shift inside him, a cold anger he'd never experienced before. "Stop," he said, his voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby students look up from their conversations. Mason laughed and snatched the book from Tyler. "Or what? You'll tell the teacher?" He held the book over his head and let it drop, pages fluttering as it hit the floor with a wet slap. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he stepped on it, grinding his heel into the cover. The cafeteria had gone quieter now, sensing the tension building at Adrian's table. Students pulled out phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. Mrs. Henderson, the lunch monitor, was on the other side of the room dealing with a spilled drink, oblivious to the brewing confrontation. Adrian knelt to pick up his ruined book, and that's when Jake made his fatal mistake. As Adrian rose, Jake drew back his leg and kicked him directly in the side of the head, the impact sending Adrian sprawling across the floor as gasps erupted from nearby tables. "Stay down where you belong, freak," Jake snarled, standing over Adrian's prone form. Adrian lay still for a moment, his vision swimming from the impact. Blood trickled from a cut on his temple where Jake's sneaker had connected. The familiar taste of copper filled his mouth, and something deep inside him snapped, not with rage, but with cold, calculated purpose. Master Santos's voice echoed in his mind. "When the line is crossed, when they escalate to actual violence, you no longer have a choice. You protect yourself and you make sure they never do it again." Adrian rose slowly, wiping blood from his face with the back of his hand. When he looked up, his eyes held a different quality, focused, predatory, completely calm. The change was so dramatic that Jake actually took a step backward. "That was a mistake," Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying across the now silent cafeteria. Jake recovered his bravado quickly, encouraged by his friend's presence and the watching crowd. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it, nerd?" He swung a wild haymaker at Adrian's face, expecting an easy target. What happened next would be talked about at Westfield High for years to come. Adrian moved like liquid, slipping Jake's punch with minimal effort while simultaneously stepping inside his guard. His right hand shot forward in a perfect palm strike, connecting with Jake's solar plexus and driving all the air from his lungs. As Jake doubled over, gasping, Adrian's knee came up to meet his face with surgical precision, breaking Jake's nose with an audible crack that echoed through the cafeteria. Jake stumbled backward, blood streaming from his nose, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "You little," he began, but Adrian was already moving. Tyler rushed forward with a wild swing, but Adrian ducked low and swept his legs, sending him crashing into a nearby table. Before Tyler could recover, Adrian was on him, applying a blood choke with the practiced efficiency of years of grappling training. Tyler's struggles grew weaker until he went limp, unconscious in less than 10 seconds. Adrian released him immediately, letting him slump to the floor, but ensuring he was breathing. Mason, seeing his friends destroyed so easily, tried to back away, but Adrian stalked forward with predatory grace. "You wanted to hurt me," Adrian said, his voice eerily calm. "Now you get to find out what that feels like." Mason threw a desperate punch, which Adrian caught effortlessly, twisting the arm into a standing armbar that made Mason scream in agony. With controlled pressure, Adrian could feel the joint approaching its breaking point, but instead of snapping it, he released Mason and delivered a devastating hook to his ribs, the impact producing a sound like breaking kindling. Mason crumpled to the ground, clutching his side and struggling to breathe. At least 2 ribs cracked from the precision strike. The entire cafeteria was in stunned silence. Students who had been recording with their phones stood frozen, mouths hanging open. Jake struggled to his feet, his face a mask of blood and disbelief. "This isn't over," Jake gasped through his broken nose. Adrian turned to face him, and Jake flinched at the cold fire in his eyes. "Yes, it is," Adrian said. "You had your chance to walk away every single day for months. You chose to escalate. You chose violence, and now you know exactly what I'm capable of." He stepped closer to Jake, who instinctively backed away despite trying to maintain his bravado. "If you or your friends ever touch me again, if you even look at me wrong, I will put you in the hospital. Do you understand me?" Jake nodded frantically, blood still streaming from his nose. "Good." Adrian turned to address the entire cafeteria, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. "That goes for anyone else who thinks I'm an easy target. I came here wanting peace. I tried to avoid conflict. But if you bring violence to me, I will finish it." Mrs. Henderson finally arrived, pushing through the crowd of stunned students. "What happened here?" she demanded, surveying the scene of Jake clutching his broken nose, Tyler unconscious on the floor, and Mason writhing in pain. "They attacked me," Adrian said simply, gesturing to the blood still trickling from his temple. "I defended myself." Dozens of students nodded in agreement, their phone recordings providing undeniable proof of who had started the violence. Even Jake, through his pain and humiliation, couldn't deny that he had thrown the first punch, and the kick that had preceded Adrian's response. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Jake, Tyler, and Mason were suspended for assault, their athletic eligibility revoked pending a disciplinary hearing. Adrian was cleared of all wrongdoing after the principal reviewed multiple phone videos showing the clear sequence of events. Jake's father, a prominent local businessman, tried to pressure the school to punish Adrian as well, but the evidence was overwhelming. More importantly, word of the cafeteria incident spread through Westfield High like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew that the quiet kid in the corner wasn't someone to mess with. Students who had never spoken to Adrian before nodded respectfully in the hallways. Teachers who had barely noticed him began including him in class discussions, recognizing an intelligence that had been hiding behind his reserved nature. Jake returned to school a week later with 2 black eyes and a bandaged nose, his swagger completely gone. He kept his head down in the hallways and never made eye contact with Adrian. Tyler and Mason, when they returned, gave Adrian a wide berth, their former arrogance replaced by nervous glances and hurried footsteps whenever they saw him. The change wasn't just in how others treated Adrian, it was in how he carried himself. No longer hunched over his books, he walked with quiet confidence, his head held high. He still preferred solitude, but now it was by choice rather than necessity. Several students approached him, wanting to be friends with the legendary figure who had single-handedly taken down the school's most feared bullies. One afternoon, as Adrian sat in his usual spot in the library, a girl named Sarah Martinez approached hesitantly. She was small and bookish, the type who had probably been dealing with her own share of harassment. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you." Adrian looked up from his homework, confused. For what? For showing them they can't just hurt people without consequences. Jake and his friends used to pick on me too, but they won't even look in my direction now. She smiled shyly. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Adrian felt a warmth spread through his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. "I just did what I had to do." "Well, it mattered," Sarah said. "More than you know." As she walked away, Adrian reflected on Master Santos's teachings about the warrior's path. He had tried to avoid conflict, had shown restraint and patience far beyond what most people could manage. But when faced with genuine violence, when the line was finally crossed, he had responded with decisive action that protected not just himself, but others who couldn't protect themselves. That evening, Adrian called his old instructor. "I used what you taught me today," he said, explaining the situation. Santos was quiet for a long moment. "How do you feel about it?" Adrian considered the question carefully. "Proud, but not in a way that wants to hurt more people. I feel like I found balance." "That is exactly how a true warrior should feel," Santos replied. "You gave them every opportunity to choose peace. When they chose violence, you ended it quickly and decisively, with just enough force to stop the threat. You didn't become a bully yourself, you became a protector." The final validation came 2 weeks later during lunch. Adrian was sitting with Sarah and a few other students who had gravitated toward his table when Jake approached, alone and visibly nervous. The cafeteria went quiet, students remembering the last confrontation between the two. But instead of hostility, Jake's face showed something Adrian had never seen there before, genuine remorse. "Adrian," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to apologize. What I did was wrong. I've been thinking about it every day, and I know there's no excuse for how I treated you." Adrian studied Jake's face, reading the sincerity there. "Why?" he asked simply. Jake's shoulders sagged. "Because I was angry and scared and taking it out on someone I thought couldn't fight back. Because I was being exactly the kind of person I hate." He paused, struggling with the words. "Because you could have seriously hurt me that day, but you didn't. You used just enough force to stop me, nothing more. That's not what a bully would have done." Adrian nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But Jake, if you ever touch me or anyone else like that again—" "I won't," Jake said quickly. "I swear, I learned my lesson." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I respect you now. I was wrong about you from the beginning." As Jake walked away, Adrian felt a profound sense of closure. He had faced his tormentors and emerged victorious. But more importantly, he had done so without losing himself in the process. He had shown mercy when he could have shown brutality, had used his power to protect rather than dominate. The quiet kid in the corner had found his voice, and Westfield High was a better place for it. Adrian Blackwood had learned that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in avoiding a fight. It's in knowing exactly when and how to end one.